Hello, welcome back to my channel. My name is Carly Stevens. I'm the author of the Tanuan Academy series, and this is English Nerd. So I've been teaching AP Lit for 10 years now, or I'm about to start my 10th year, which is pretty crazy. And I took AP Lit as well as a high schooler. The test hasn't changed in any appreciable way since then, except for the format, which has been expanded as of 2020, when there's now an electronic option, as in addition to the handwritten option. So all that to say, I feel that I've seen a lot of people go through AP Lit. I've done it myself, and so I wanted to share with you my top 10 tips for taking AP Lit. First of all, congratulations. You're about to take AP Lit. As I'm filming this, it is right before the 2021-2022 school year starts. And so congratulations for pushing yourself and going for a college level course in high school. That is really admirable. But like any course, but especially this one, you get out of it what you put into it. That is 100% true of AP Lit. Since I've done some relatively popular AP Lit videos in the past, I've had comments, lots of comments from people who didn't really prepare the whole rest of the year leading up to the exam in May, and then I got these sort of panicked texts like, well, I haven't read anything this whole year. I have a week, what would you suggest? And to be honest, although I try to respond to just about every comment that I get, at that point I'm like, well, you're sort of on your own. And I have some videos about classics that I would recommend people reading. Anyway, I appreciate that you have come here for information about how to get the most out of AP Lit. So I'm going to organize my tips into 3 categories. Category 1 is general throughout the school year. Category 2 is multiple choice on the exam. And category 3 is the essay portion of the exam, which is technically 3 essays, poetry, prose, and the open question. So you can skip to any one of those sections, and I will link the previous videos that I've made specifically about the different sections of the AP exam down below. So without further ado, these are my top 10 tips for anybody taking AP Lit this year. Number 1, read. I mentioned already that there are people who go through the entire class, the entire year, and don't read anything. That's just a crime, but that's not even really what I'm talking about. When I say read, I mean really read. I mean, don't just read one thing, but read broadly. Now, hopefully your class is set up in such a way that you can read a variety of things just in the context of the class. I'm going to hope that that's the case. If it is, then just do your assigned reading. If it's not, then maybe seek out other types of books, other types of classics. They don't have to be long. They can be something short. Anthem is really short. Lord of the Flies is short. Of Mice and Men is short. But try to stretch yourself and actually read classic works in such a way that you're getting something out of them. So what I find with my students who are taking the class is that generally it's the people who have already been successful in English throughout their high school careers who want to take AP Literature their senior year. Because they've developed the skills of discussing literature and writing about literature, and they tend to be the ones who get all their homework done, at least in a quick way. What I find is that the temptation for those students is to skim. Just barely kind of skim, so they basically they know what's going on enough to kind of be passable the next day in discussion. That is not how I organize my AP Lit class. Instead, I assume that you already know what's going on in everything but the most difficult texts that we talk about. Instead, what you should do is actually read the works as though it were something you were reading on your own time for fun. I'm going to assume that you've done that. If you read the Harry Potter series, then even if you read it quickly, you know that you read all the words as you were going along, and you were picturing what it was like, and you were thinking about how this affected the characters, and you were starting to form theories about how the mystery would end up at the end. That is the kind of reading that is most beneficial for you to be doing throughout the year. So if that means you need to adjust the way you think about school reading versus personal reading, then now is the time to make that adjustment. You're not going to necessarily like every book that you read in AP literature. I know that I don't love every classic, but treat each one as though it's something that you're reading for yourself, because largely you are reading for yourself and for the ability to understand at a higher level and to analyze at a deeper level and to appreciate language even when it's not always what you're used to experiencing. So anyway, that is tip number 1, read. Number 2 is to have a growth mindset. So often, again, with my students, what happens is they're used to getting high grades on their writing, they're used to getting high grades in English, period. And what happens with just about everybody is that there comes a time, not consistently necessarily, but there comes an essay or an assignment that is just difficult because it's at a different level or it's from a different perspective than they're used to writing, and they don't always ace every paper. And so it can be kind of devastating when you get, a 60% when you're used to getting a 95. But what I encourage for you is that you have a growth mindset through all of this. A growth mindset is the idea that you might not be an expert at this yet. It's that yet. It's saying not that I'm as good as I'm going to be, this is just how it is, and kind of sitting back and letting things be the way they are, but your effort can make a difference and will make a difference over time if you just stick with it. So yes, it's very possible that you'll get a lower grade in this AP class, especially if you're not used to taking AP courses, but see it as a learning experience. Don't see it as a failure. See it as, okay, so this particular thing didn't go well. How can I do the next one better? Which leads into my 3rd point and my final point about the class in general. Learn to ask really good questions. So kind of following on with my previous point, learn to ask good questions of the teacher about your own work. Hey, what does this comment mean? Why did I get a B and not an A? Why should the writing be this way? How are the essays graded? Learn to ask really good questions of not only the teacher, although you should develop that skill of advocating for yourself if you have not done that already. Of course, do it respectfully. I don't want you to get in your teacher's face, no matter what kind of a teacher they are, good, bad, or indifferent. I want you to be respectful of them. But don't be afraid to ask questions. But in addition to asking your teacher questions, learn to ask questions of the books as well. You're part of a great conversation of some of the world's greatest writers and thinkers. And it's a shame if you just kind of passively take in the information and the characters and you're like, oh, yes, check. That's how it works. Instead, start to ask, why? Why would the character do that? Why is it written in this kind of difficult style? Is there a reason for that? Why use that word when it's so shocking compared to what they could have used? Start to get to a place where you naturally can ask a huge number of good questions. That skill of asking good questions is the first, it's a major step. I don't know if it's the first step, but it's a major step in learning to be a great analytical thinker, a great analyzer of not only literature, but all kinds of other things as well. So if you're not planning on being an English teacher or a writer or an editor or anything like that, you're planning on going into the military or being a scientist or something totally apart from English, then great. Once again, good for you for taking this class. The skills that you can develop here are not skills that just exist in English isolation. They're ones that can be helpful in a huge variety of scenarios and can just help you be a better thinker in life. So learn to ask good questions. If you're not sure what kinds of questions to ask about literature, why is a really good starting point. Just why everything. Pretend like you're 4 years old again and just start asking why, even of the simplest kinds of things, and you'll be surprised what comes out of it. Not an answer for every question, but more insight than you would have had otherwise. Okay, moving on to multiple choice, the things that I've found are the most helpful for AP Lit multiple choice, which is notoriously difficult, but mostly it's not because of the content like it would be for Calculus BC or something like that, which is content-wise very difficult, but instead it's skill-wise very challenging. So if you do what I suggested with those first tips, then you'll be well on your way to developing those skills that you need. But then, of course, just like any standardized test, there are some test-specific kinds of things that can also be helpful for navigating, a good score. So one thing that I find helpful as just kind of a way of thinking about the multiple choice, which, if you're not already aware, gives you 4 to, I think sometimes 5, but usually 4 passages, a mix of poetry and prose. Sometimes you'll get essays or drama, but almost always it's going to be fiction, poetry, and prose. One of the best things that I've found to approach reading those passages in preparation for any multiple choice is to approach poetry like prose and prose like poetry. So what I mean by that, attacking poetry like prose, we'll take that first one, is that instead of reading poetry and thinking about it in a sort of abstract way, think about the poetry as much as you can in a way that you would approach a novel or something, more for content. What does it mean? You can always go back and check for literary devices and things like that. But it's good to get an overall picture of what the poem's actually about, and a good way to do that is to pretend like you're just reading it like a paragraph. So that means reading through the lines rather than pausing at the end of every line. Even if it rhymes, you don't need to pause at the end of every line. Instead, just pause at punctuation like you would do for an ordinary sentence. That will give you a better idea of the overall meaning of the poem, and that will give you a lot to work with once you get into some of those nitty-gritty questions that relate to the overall meaning of the poem itself. Reading prose like poetry is kind of the opposite. You're going to read the normal paragraphs, not so much for what they mean, because that's going to be more obvious, I would assume, but instead for the poetic way that the writer puts those things together. So be more on the lookout for form rather than content, because the other one's going to come a little bit more easily. So if you read the poetry like prose and the prose like poetry, then your brain should have kind of both form and content, or if you prefer the terminology, style and substance in your head at the same time, so you have more to work with for the multiple choice questions. Okay, the next multiple choice piece of advice is that anytime you have a partially wrong answer, the thing's completely wrong. So this is kind of process of elimination 1.5. You have normal process of elimination. Do you obviously see this in the text? Can you make this argument in the text? No. But if something is at all off, often there will be 2-part answers where there's an adverb and an adjective. Like terrifyingly adequate or something like that. If one of those descriptors does not actually mesh with what you've read, then you can just eliminate that entire thing. Same thing for the kinds of questions that give you several different answers, the Roman numeral questions, where it says something like, which of the following is not treated as a symbolic object in the poem? A, B, C, D, E. So looking at that and thinking about it in terms of like each item, and thinking, is this wrong or partially wrong? Yes, no, yes, no, yes, no, yes, no. And then you just look at which answers you found to be correct, and then you match that with the options that are given below. If you look at the options below and try to figure it out from there, then you're going to be kind of screwed. So yes, partially wrong equals all wrong. Don't hesitate to just cut it. My last tip for the multiple choice is quite possibly the one that trips up my own students the most often. They'll try to go quickly through all the questions knowing that they're timed, and they won't take the time to properly read the question. So my tip is always read the question carefully. Especially when there are words like always, never, or except. I can't tell you the number of times that my students have gotten in trouble because they did not pay attention to one of those massively important qualifying words, and therefore they chose the wrong answer because they assumed they knew what the question was asking. Never assume that you know what the question is asking. Sometimes, I hate to say that they're trying to trip you up, but they're trying to see if you're paying attention, and they'll make sure that you're paying attention. So read the question really carefully, and that goes for the line numbers as well, especially for vocab and context kinds of questions. If it says, what does the word flat mean in context of line 13, don't think to yourself, well, I read it, I know the definition of flat that they were probably using, and then choose that answer. You read that question carefully. You saw that there was line 13 mentioned in there, so go back, check actual line 13 plus or minus a couple lines so you have context, and then make your choice. Otherwise, you're going to fall into some kind of trap, and that would be just a shame. So if you do those things, you should be in pretty good shape for the multiple choice. I have an entire video just about tips for the multiple choice, and I will make sure to link that down below. So if you want some additional ideas, those are available to you. All right, on to the essays. So my next tip is to always prepare your open question works in advance. On the exam, there are, as I've already mentioned, 3 essays. There's poetry, prose, and the open question. Poetry and prose, you have selections, passages that are given to you and that you'll respond to. There's nothing you can really do about those, the choice of works there. But the open question is for you to show off what you've been doing all year long and how well you've been reading these classic works. And so all the open questions essays are some kind of variation on, here's a big theme or idea that shows up in lots of literature. How does it play out in a work of great literary merit, and how does it relate to the overall meaning? That's pretty much how they all look. So very open-ended. There always is a list of potential famous works that you can use that very closely pertain to that theme. You are in no way obligated to use that list. In fact, you should just ignore the list. Who cares about the list? I don't. Instead, what you should do is prepare a couple of works, not just one, but I would recommend a backup and possibly another backup, but prepare 2 works that are different. So maybe The Importance of Being Earnest, the play by Oscar Wilde, and Shakespeare's Macbeth. We have different time periods. Yes, they're both plays, but they deal with very different themes and have very different tones. So they're different enough that you could get away with that. And what I mean by prepare them is to do a couple of things. 1, read the entire thing. If you've read only an excerpt from Macbeth or an act, then you are not prepared to use that as a source. So throw it out. Make sure it's something that you've read all of. Make sure that you know the basic details. Maybe it's been a few months since you've read this particular work, but you want to use it in the open question. Don't assume that you'll remember everything. Instead, make sure that you know character names, that you know who was there, that you know what happened when. You have all those events absolutely locked down. Now, you don't have time necessarily to memorize the entire thing. I get that. But in order for you to do well on the open question, you'll need to drill down with some specifics. And so a way that you can prepare these works is, okay, so you've chosen Fahrenheit 451. You know the characters, you know generally what happens. Good. Okay, so we're on like stage 1 of preparation. Stage 2 is identifying 2 things. 1, what are some major turning point scenes in that story that change the direction of the story, that change the character? Maybe choose, 3 to 6 of those majorly important scenes and actually reread them. So you don't just know generally what happens, but you know that when Guy Montag kills Beatty, that his death is described like he's frothing up like a slug. I mean, it's gross. Maybe you remember exactly what Beatty's last words were when he taunted Guy Montag using some of the Shakespeare that Guy loved so much. My point is, find those turning point scenes, know them inside and out. Because they're turning points, you can use them for lots and lots of different prompts. They'll apply to almost everything, and you will be prepared with an arsenal of details that go far beyond what SparkNotes could provide with its helpful overall approach. And then finally, what are a couple ways of interpreting the overall meaning of the work? So the overall meaning is a message that the author wants to leave the audience. You could make a case for, lack of censorship. It's wrong for books to be censored. You can make that case as kind of the message of Fahrenheit 451. Or if you're not quite sure that there's a message per se, maybe it's a more modern work and there isn't some sort of, and the moral of the story is, then you can talk about what the story is about and how it seems through the way that it's written that you're supposed to feel about that topic. So those are a few ways to approach overall meaning. Once you've done those things, then you will be prepared with your works for the open question. So kind of a long explanation there, but hopefully one that is helpful. I did a whole video just on open question essays and how to prepare for them. It's a lot of the same information, but it goes a little bit deeper as well. Okay, I'm going to do this one next because it just kind of segues nicely from the last point that I was making. Don't forget in any of the 3 essays, prose, poetry, or the open question, that you need to address the overall meaning of the work. This is another thing I see with my students all the time. They can, especially with prose and poetry, really pick out literary devices and themes. Maybe they need to expand on them a little bit more or something. But what's really common, especially at the beginning of the year, is for them to forget to answer the last part of the prompt, which is almost invariably some form of saying, you need to talk about how this fits into and enhances the overall meaning of the work. So I already gave you a couple ways to kind of determine what the overall meaning is. There's some room for interpretation there. As long as you can make a good case, then you should be fine. But what is the overall meaning? Is it a message? Is it the way you should feel about a topic? What are we supposed to be getting out of this? And make sure that for all of your essays, all 3, that you're taking specific details and then applying those to the bigger picture, not just keeping them here, but making sure that they connect out there. So don't forget about overall meaning. That can give your essays a hit. Okay, number 9 is always include a strong thesis statement. Thesis statements are enormously important. In fact, they're so important that with the relatively new grading scale that moved from being on a 1 to 9 scale to a 1 to 6 scale, one of those points, one of the 6, is solely devoted to having a strong thesis statement. So a thesis statement is just a statement of what you intend to prove in your essay. It's addressing the prompt in a concise, specific, debatable claim. That's what it is. Now, since these essays are timed, a lot of people don't feel confident putting their thesis statement right at the beginning, where you would ordinarily see a thesis statement for, a take-home essay, for example. It's fine if it's not at the beginning, but if it's not at the beginning, then you need to stick it right at the very end, like a mic drop kind of moment, someplace where it is obvious and clear. They need to see the thesis statement, and not only for the grading, but just so that you know what it is that you're planning to prove, what it is that you've proven, what your essay is actually about. So don't float around looking at shiny details. Make sure that it all comes together with a one-sentence dynamite thesis statement. I made a video a long time ago. It was one of my first videos on YouTube about thesis statements, and I'm going to link that down below because it's the quality is not spectacular in terms of the audio visual, but the information, I stand by it. And then finally, my last tip should surprise no one, but I'm telling you, it can make or break your experience in AP Lit. It is to be specific. Be specific. When you're writing any one of those 3 essays, make sure that you're not speaking generally, but if you can drill down 1 or 2 more levels of specificity, then do it. People are afraid to do this with the open question in particular because they know that the readers can't have read every single classic. What if they haven't read Of Mice and Men? It doesn't matter. Assume that the person that you're writing to has read the same things that you've read and remembers them generally, so you can talk about the general plot, but only in a quick sense, just to orient the reader. But your argument is going to come from specifics. Your actual force of your argument comes down to details. So for the poetry and prose essays, regularly quote the poetry and prose that's provided for you. For your open question, regularly give evidence that is not, well, Sidney Carton changes over the course of the book, he treats so-and-so more nicely, etc., etc. But actually look at a scene. Remember those scenes that you prepared? Yes. Look at a scene and a detail from that scene and then interpret that and tie that into your argument. Specifics are what separate largely a lower level underclassman kind of essay, which is maybe structured correctly, that's not incorrect per se, but from something that is worth being considered college level. So those are my 10 top tips for AP Lit. Best of luck, guys. You can do it. Again, this is the kind of class where you get out of it what you put in it. So no matter where you're starting from in terms of ability, you can go from here to here if you follow these tips. All right, let me know if you have any questions down in the comments. Don't forget to subscribe for more English nerdy goodness. I'm going to be talking about all things English class, writing and literature, in addition to writing your own books if you're interested in something like that, all throughout the rest of the year. So get those notifications, like this video if you like it, and I will see you on Monday.